Yo, what's going on, everybody? Before I get into what I'm about to get into, I think it's very important that I spend a couple minutes to really talk about the timeline and where we currently are at right now as pertains to this virus. And this is important to do because we need to make sure we have the proper framing before going into the topic that I'm going to talk about. All right. So, as we all are aware of, we are currently in the midst of a pandemic. The virus, also known as coronavirus, has been said to have killed around 4.5 million people worldwide. And along with that, we have human rights being violated, we have freedoms of movement being restricted, millions feel imprisoned in their own home, we have freedoms to speak freely about the virus being restricted, we've had lockdowns to slow the spread, and thousands of businesses have been closed permanently, all while wearing masks has now seemed to become a new permanent human feature. In addition to that, this virus has essentially torn through the fabric of our country in multiple ways. We now have infighting. We have infighting among family members, friends, co-workers, just having these internal fights. We have the mask versus the maskless. We have the vax versus the unvax. We even have the pro-mandates versus the anti-mandates. And it should be noted that these infights have not been organic, but instead they have been supplanted in the minds of the citizens by the media and, of course, our leader, Joe Biden, who has repeatedly said that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
I just got a monthly briefing from my COVID team, and here's the latest data that confirms that we're still in a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Along with him saying that, this has also created division and animosity amongst the citizens. Now, we're going to get back to that because that statement is pretty harsh and it's a strong statement that's being made by our president. So, of course, this must be right, right? So, with all of this being said, this has all led to millions being at risk of losing their jobs. Why? Well, because of the new mandates that have been set by this administration that states that all businesses with 100 plus employees must have all vaccinated employees. In return, all employees who refuse the vaccine will be fired. Now, mind you, this is all coming under the guise of our health and safety. Now we have thousands of frontline workers and doctors and nurses being fired from their jobs during a season when hospitalization rates are usually high either way, in which being short-staffed during this time frame by itself could cause a crisis. And in this case, this would be considered to be a manufactured crisis because it didn't have to happen. We have police and firefighters being fired from their jobs for not getting the vaccine. And once again, being short-staffed in itself could cause a crisis. And once again, this would be considered to be a manufactured crisis because it didn't have to happen. We have truckers and pilots also being restricted and or fired, in which again, being short-staffed could cause a crisis, which would be a manufactured crisis because none of these things had to be done. But remember, this is all for your health and safety. It's all for you. In addition to all of that, it should be noted that America has had over 45 million COVID cases, in which, thankfully, 35 million has survived, and unfortunately, 753,000 have died. And when we look at the percentages of dying from this virus, it should be noted that there is a 1.6% chance of dying from this virus and a 98.4% chance of surviving from this virus. That should be noted. Now, millions have been exposed to this virus, all while developing natural immunity, which has been shown to be effective at decreasing the chances of being infected again. However, our leaders, once again, have completely ignored natural immunity, all while questioning its durability and touting the vaccines as the savior and the way out of this pandemic. In addition to that, they're also requiring booster shots indefinitely. This is regardless of your risk profile, your age, your comorbidities, your prior infection, natural immunity, you're pregnant or trying to get pregnant. Regardless of all of that, they are mandating that you get this vaccine or your freedoms will be restricted. It should also be noted that the manufacturers of the hero vaccine itself, produced by Pfizer, has said that this virus is never going away. In fact, they called it an endemic, meaning that it will always be around. They have also said that they were also prepared to make annual booster shots available. However, many Americans still believe that we are working towards crushing this virus, but that does not seem to be the case. Now, why is any of this relevant? Well, when Joe Biden wandered on stage and made that statement that this is the pandemic of the unvaccinated, he really put the blame of everything that we're dealing with in the laps of those who have chosen not to be vaccinated. So the millions of people who are at risk of losing their jobs, well, just blame the unvaccinated. The supply chain issues that we're having, well, just blame the unvaccinated. The mask mandates, well, just blame the unvaccinated. All of this despite the fact that the vaccine does not stop infection, nor does it stop transmission. In other words, even if you're vaccinated, you can still be infected and you can still transmit the virus.
We are seeing that the ability of individuals who are infected through breakthrough infections, namely vaccinated people who ultimately get infected, that they are generally without symptoms or minimally symptomatic. However, it is clear that they are capable of transmitting the infection to uninfected individuals. And the data that they reported indicates that if you look at the level of virus in the nasopharynx of a person who's vaccinated and has a breakthrough infection, and compare that to the level of virus in the nasopharynx of an unvaccinated person who's infected, they're essentially equivalent, which would go along and underscore the fact that vaccinated people who do have a breakthrough infection are clearly capable of transmitting the infection to an uninfected person.
And being so focused on these multiple little arguments and infighting has really caused us to miss the forest from the trees, because one of the main questions that should be asked is, where did this virus come from? Well, enter Rand Paul. Earlier this year, Senator Rand Paul thought this was an important question to ask. Where did this virus come from? And in fact, he thought this would be a good question to ask Dr. Fauci, among other things he's going to ask Dr. Fauci. And I think that was a good move, because what if, in fact, this was not a pandemic of the unvaccinated, but instead a pandemic of bad people, a pandemic of wicked, evil, unethical, deceptive people? Let's play this video.
Viruses that in nature only infect animals were manipulated in the Wuhan lab to gain the function of infecting humans. This research fits the definition of the research that the NIH said was subject to the pause in 2014 to 2017, a pause in funding on gain of function. But the NIH failed to recognize this, defines it away, and it never came under any scrutiny. Dr. Richard E. Bright, a molecular biologist from Rutgers, described this research in Wuhan as, the Wuhan lab used NIH funding to construct novel chimeric SARS-related coronaviruses able to infect human cells and laboratory animals. This is high-risk research that creates new potential pandemic pathogens that exist only in the lab, not in nature. This research matches, these are Dr. E. Bright's words, this research matches, indeed epitomizes, the definition of gain-of-function research done entirely in Wuhan, for which there was supposed to be a federal pause. Dr. Fauci, knowing that it is a crime to lie to Congress, do you wish to retract your statement of May 11th where you claimed that the NIH never funded gain-of-function research in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, I have never lied before the Congress, and I do not retract that statement. This paper that you are referring to was judged by qualified staff up and down the chain as not being gain of function. Let me finish.
You take an animal virus and you increase its transmissibility to humans, right. You're saying that's not gain of function?
Yeah, that is correct. And Senator Paul, you do not know what you are talking about, quite frankly. And I want to say that officially. You do not know what you are talking about. Okay, you get one person.
Let's read from the NIH definition of gain of function. This is your definition that you guys wrote. It says that scientific research that increases the transmissibility among mammals is gain of function. They took animal viruses that only occur in animals, and they increased their transmissibility to humans. How you can say that is not gain of function?
It is not.
It's a dance, and you're dancing around this because you're trying to obscure responsibility for 4 million people dying around the world from a pandemic.
And let's let Dr. Fauci.
I have to, well, now you're getting into something. If the point that you are making is that the grant that was funded as a sub-award from EcoHealth to Wuhan created SARS-CoV-2, that's where you are getting. Let me finish.
We don't know.
Well,
we don't
wait
know
a minute.
If it did
I
come
can-
from the lab, but all the evidence is pointing that it came from the lab, and there will be responsibility for those who funded the lab, including yourself.
I totally
This committee
resent,
will allow the witness to respond.
I totally resent the lie that you are now propagating, Senator, because if you look at the viruses that were used in the experiments, that were given in the annual reports, that were published in the literature, it is molecularly impossible.
No one's saying those viruses caused it.
It
No
is
one is alleging that
molecularly.
those viruses caused the pandemic. What we're alleging is that gain-of-function research was going on in that lab, and NIH funded it.
That
You
is
can't
not-
get away from it. It meets your definition, and you are obfuscating the truth.
I'm not obfuscating the truth.
Senator
You are the
Paul's
one.
time is expired, but I will allow the witness to.
Let me just finish. I want everyone to understand that if you look at those viruses, and that's judged by qualified virologists and evolutionary biologists, those viruses are molecularly impossible
No one's
to
saying
result
they are. No
in
one's saying those viruses
SARS-CoV-2.
caused the pandemic.
Senator Paul,
We're saying they are gain-of-function viruses because they were
they're not.
animal viruses that became more transmissible in human, and you funded it.
And
won't
you
admit the truth.
and you
Senator
implying
Paul, your time has expired, and I will allow witnesses who come before this committee to respond.
and you are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent
could
that.
have been.
And if
And it
anybody
could
is
have been.
lying here, Senator, it is you.
So as you can see, Dr. Fauci completely denied that gain-of-function research was happening. He completely denied that the American citizens were funding gain-of-function research. Now, despite Fauci denying this, there's been a tremendous amount of evidence pointing towards this being true. Well, we now have more proof that Fauci knew there was gain-of-function research going on. Not only was gain-of-function research going on, but it was actually being funded with American taxpayers' money through a group called EcoHealth by a guy named P.E.A.C.E, who's just a real winner, a great citizen. And matter of fact, let's hear what he has to say.
The NIH's funding for the Wuhan lab was paid to an international nonprofit called the EcoHealth Alliance, headed by P.E.A.C.E.
So we go to foundations and say, look, you've been trying to stop the wildlife trade in China for 20 years. You've put all this money into it. If you have a health angle to that, it really does work. The markets, the wildlife markets in China were never closed down because of, ethical concerns or conservation. But the minute SARS emerged, they closed them down.
Right.
In this December 2019 interview, Daszak described how there are hundreds of SARS viruses lurking in bats and other wild animals that have potential transmissibility to livestock and to humans. The key to preventing a terrible human toll, Daszak said, is to obtain viral specimens from those wild animals and do gain-of-function research to craft an effective human vaccine.
You can manipulate them in the lab pretty easily. It's just spike protein drives a lot of what happens with the coronavirus, zoonotic risk. So you can get the sequence, you can build the protein, insert it into a backbone of another virus, and do some work in the lab. So you can get more predictive and get a better vaccine.
So last year, the idea of a lab leak was considered to be misinformation. And that's because when the WHO did their investigation on the possibility of a lab leak, they found nothing. Well, guess who led the investigation on the lab leak? P.E.A.C.E of EcoHealth. They literally got this guy to investigate himself, and he came up with no evidence. And so essentially what you have is this administration blaming the unvaccinated for causing all of the things that we're currently facing and dealing with, and also causing the things that we're going to continue to deal with. They are literally placing the entire blame on those who have chosen not to be vaccinated, all while touting that if they get vaccinated, the supply chain issues will end. The mandates will end. The firings will end. The restrictions will end. Everything will supposedly end, all while not dealing with the origins of this virus. Well, now we have the head of NIH admitting that gain-of-function research was indeed taking place in Wuhan, and it was indeed funded by taxpayers' money. So this article I'm going to read is titled, NIH Admits U.S. Funded Gain-of-Function in Wuhan Despite Fauci's Denials. The National Institute of Health has stunningly admitted to funding gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses at China's Wuhan lab, despite Dr. Anthony Fauci repeatedly insisting to Congress that no such thing happened. In a letter to Rep. James Comer on Wednesday, a top NIH official blamed EcoHealth Alliance, the New York City-based nonprofit that has funneled U.S. funds to the Wuhan lab, for not being transparent about the work it was doing. NIH's Principal Deputy Director, Lawrence A. Tabak, wrote in the letter that EcoHealth's limited experiment tested whether spike proteins from naturally occurring bat coronaviruses circulating in China were capable of binding to the human ACE2 receptor in a mouse model. All right, so this is interesting because this is exactly what Fauci was denying. Let me read this to you again. NIH's Principal Deputy Director, Lawrence A. Tabak, wrote in a letter that EcoHealth's limited experiment tested whether spike proteins from naturally occurring bat coronaviruses circulating in China were capable of binding to the human ACE2 receptor in mouse models. NIH's Principal Deputy Director, Lawrence A. Tabak, blamed New York City-based nonprofit for not being transparent about the work it was doing in China. The lab mice infected with the modified virus became sicker than those that were given the unmodified virus, according to Tabak. As sometimes occurs in science, this was an unexpected result of the research, as opposed to something that the researchers set out to do, Tabak said. Gain-of-function research refers to viruses being taken from animals before they are genetically altered in a lab to make them more transmissible to humans. The admission from the NIH official directly contradicts Fauci's testimony to Congress in May and June, when he denied that the U.S. had funded gain-of-function projects in Wuhan. Tabak, who did not use the term gain-of-function in his letter but alluded to it, said EcoHealth, which is run by British scientist Peter Daszak, failed to comply with terms of the grant, which required it to report immediately a 1 log increase in growth. EcoHealth failed to report this finding right away, as required by the terms of the grant. EcoHealth is being notified that they have 5 days from today to submit to NIH any and all unpublished data from the experiments and work conducted under this award. Tabak said if EcoHealth had alerted NIH to the growth, it would have prompted a review if the research plan should be reevaluated. He insisted that the bat coronaviruses studied under the NIH grant could not have become COVID-19 because the sequences of the viruses are genetically very distant. So there you have it. You have the deputy director from NIH, Lawrence A. Tabak, acknowledging that EcoHealth's limited experiment tested whether spike proteins from naturally occurring bat coronaviruses circulating in China were capable of binding to the human ACE2 receptors in a mouse model. Well, at the same time, this guy is not using the actual term gain of function, but everything he's alluding to is gain of function. And then at the end, you see that he's saying that although this was gain of function and it seems extremely similar to the current virus that we're dealing with right now in this pandemic, it couldn't have come from the actual lab. Although they admitted that they were doing gain of function with a virus that is extremely similar to the current virus that we're dealing with right now in this pandemic, he's saying that it could not have become COVID-19 because the sequences of the virus are so genetically very distant. Those are the words that he said. I think we need to really shift our attention from the things that we're currently focusing on. Right now, we're really focusing on each other right now. We're really focusing on, vax versus unvax, mask versus no mask, all these little things that we're focusing on. I mean, they're big things because they're big issues, but the larger issue at hand is the origins of this virus. Where did it come from? And the fact that the guy who is leading us through this whole entire pandemic right now gets to remain silent about the accusations that are being made about him. And then when he does speak on it, it's just lie after lie after lie after lie. And he continues to be the leader of getting us out this pandemic. We need to mandate that this guy come clean. We need to mandate that our fearless leaders, both Biden as well as Fauci, stop causing division. We need to mandate that they actually be real with the American citizens and let us know what's going on. I mean, just think about it. They get to sit up there and not answer any questions about the origins of the virus. And whenever they do answer questions, it's just lies. Like Fauci's just lying that he had anything or any knowledge about gain of function research that was funded by American taxpayers' money. He just gets to lie about it. At the same time, they are mandating that you get the injection. And if you're thinking that this is just going to be for 1 year, if you're thinking that you just have to get it once or twice or 3 times, you are mistaken. Although they don't have to be held accountable for everything that we're dealing with, the reason why we're in this situation, they are definitely holding us all accountable because they're mandating the vaccines, they're mandating the masks, they're mandating the distancing, they're mandating all these restrictions while not answering to us. They're making these mandates and ruining people's lives by firing them from their jobs, by closing down their businesses, by doing all these things, all while not having to answer to anyone about anything about the origins of this virus and what part they had to play in it. And once again, when they do answer, they lie. They lie about it. So I definitely think you all need to really equip yourself with this information. You need to really inform yourself about what's going on. Please, I understand that a lot of people are afraid and a lot of people are scared and just, an emotional wreck as pertains to the consequences that we're dealing with this virus. But you have to learn to set aside your emotions and think logically. Does it really make sense that the very guy who is leading us through this pandemic has his hand in so many questionable things as pertains to the origins of this virus? So let me know what y'all think. Comment below. Do me a favor, share this video. Let's have this conversation because the mandates can't work one way. All right. So I'll let y'all later. Peace.